let's get this show on the road. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Eric Wall. I am the chair of the San Francisco section of AIAA. And just a note that we are recording this session. There's going to be sort of a kind of an informal conversational aspect to it later on. So just so you're aware of that. And if you, for whatever reason, don't want to be recorded but have some questions, feel free to throw them into the Q&A box if you'd like. Anyway, just want to give you a quick word about who AIAA is. Basically, our mission is that we exist to help aerospace professionals and their organizations succeed. AIAA is the world's largest professional aerospace technical society, and we are an advocate for the aerospace industry. We have nearly 30,000 members, including 100 corporate members and more than 7,000 student members across 91 different countries around the world. There are a few different core things that we do like to focus on. We connect people, ideas, and resources. We help to advance career journeys. We build technical agility and cohesion, and we establish a united front to solve critical issues that face many of us. At both the national and local level, including some of the activities that we do here in the San Francisco section, we have networking, job fairs and career development, mentoring, scholarships, various research and publications, public policy advocacy, and many more things. Some of the other things here at the local level that you can participate in are tech talks and dinner meetings, such as this one. We have young professional get-togethers. We have happy hours, including one that's coming up next Tuesday. We have college and K through 12 outreach. We do honors and awards and various other activities. So I'd like to introduce our guest for the evening, Mr. Tom Marotta, who's going to be talking to us about building a human civilization in space. Tom is the founder and CEO of the Spaceport Company. Prior to founding the Spaceport Company, he was the principal launch licensing manager at Astra Space, where he obtained the first FAA Part 450 launch license and helped to establish Astra's second spaceport at Cape Canaveral in 8 months, faster than it's ever been done before. From 2016 to 2021, he worked at the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation, managing the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee, and writing portions of the Part 450 licensing regulation. Before that, from 2010 to 2016, he was the U.S. Foreign Service Officer, having served overseas in places such as West Africa, Europe, and Iraq. He is also an original co-founder of the Beyond Earth Institute and co-authored The High Frontier and Easier Way. Please help me welcome Tom Marotta.
Hi. Okay. Thank you, Eric. Comcheck, can you hear me and see me?
I can hear you.
Great.
Nice to see you.
Outstanding. All right. So thank you, Eric, for having me on. And I also want to thank John Jossi and Rick Kwan for introducing me to your group and inviting me to come speak. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's hope this works. And I'm going to share some slides. I have some slides here, and we'll get through it. Okay. So again, thank you for having me. My name is Tom Marotta. I'm the CEO and founder of the Spaceport Company. Being a former government employee, I like to have an agenda. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk a little bit about me. We're going to talk a lot about the Spaceport Company and who we are and what we're doing. And we're going to talk about what does this have to do with a human civilization in space settlement, And then I'm going to spend a lot of time or leave a lot of time for your questions, your comments, hate mail, whatever. Let me know what you think. And if you don't have questions for me, I'll try to think of some questions for you to get the conversation going. So here we go. A little bit about me. I've listed my career highlights over on the left and some non-career highlights over on the right. I was born and raised in New York City, went to Notre Dame as an undergrad. And my first job out of college, I went and worked for a space elevator startup in the Seattle area, actually in Bremerton, Washington. We were doing robotics and nanotechnology, basic research with the intention of eventually building a space elevator. If you don't know what a space elevator is, Google it. It's kind of crazy, but pretty exciting. It was a very ambitious project. I only did that for about 6 months, and then I had to go and get a real job, unfortunately. So I went back home to New York and worked in commercial real estate for a couple of years. And that led me to get my master's degree in urban planning. So I'm trained as an urban planner. And then I was an urban planner for a couple of years. And then I got bored with that. And at the time, the State Department was hiring urban planners to do reconstruction in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I said, oh, that'd be pretty cool. So I took the test and became a Foreign Service officer. And when I got the job, they said, great, where would you like to go? And I said, send me to Iraq. I'd like to do reconstruction. And they said, we're sending you to Africa. And I said, okay, sounds good. So anyway, did a couple of years in a place called Cape Verde in West Africa, and then did make it out to Iraq, did some work over there. Never did the reconstruction work, but did some other interesting work. And then I did some time around the EUR Bureau, European Bureau. Did that for 6 years, and then by then I had a wife, had a couple of kids, and so I was like, all right, kind of have to settle down a little, and wanted to get back into the space field, and was very, very lucky and very blessed to get the job at the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation here in DC. And so I was a regulator. I helped write portions of Part 450, did a lot of sort of quasi-government relations work, did the launch forecasts for several years, and it was a great perch to see the commercial space industry, the launch industry, companies like SpaceX and Rocket Lab and Virgin Orbit, Virgin Galactic, all these companies you've probably heard of, to see them mature and grow and become kind of the big behemoths that they are today. And to get kind of an inside look at how the risk of those operations is managed by the FAA. The FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation is a teeny tiny office compared to the size of the FAA writ large. There's about 45,000 employees in the FAA, and the Office of Commercial Space Transportation, I think, is like 120 people right now. I think I was the 86th hire. So they have a big job, really high consequence job, and there's really relatively small team managing that public risk. So really fascinating job. Astra came knocking and said, hey, we want you to do something that's never been done before. We want you to build a regulatory strategy for us to be able to launch every day. And I said, that's crazy. Let's give it a shot. Let's go. And so I worked for Astra for about 9 months, got the first Part 450 license, which is the new regulatory framework for the commercial launch industry. Got the first license for them, helped them stand up their second launch site at Cape Canaveral, helped them conduct 3 launches. It was a great job. And in the course of doing that job, I realized I really like startup world. And I realized there's a problem, which we'll talk about later, that we don't have enough launch sites in the world, and particularly in the United States. And that might seem counterintuitive, but we'll get into that shortly. Just some non-career highlights. I'll start with the second one. I co-founded a think tank called the Beyond Earth Institute, beyondearth.org. Check it out. They just had their conference a couple weeks ago. They are dedicated to laying a policy and regulatory framework to enable more human settlement, more human communities in space. So a lot of organizations are working on the technical challenges, which are non-trivial, extremely challenging. Nobody was really working on the policy frameworks, right? How do we manage property rights on the moon, right? How do we deal with all the things that make land ownership on Earth easy? Well, none of that has been set up for the moon or Mars. So that's just one example of the type of conversations and thinking that the Beyond Earth Institute is facilitating. And that first bullet up there, the High Frontier and Easier Way, I co-authored a book with a man named Al Globus, who many of you may know. He worked at NASA Ames for many years. I believe he's a member of this AIAA group. He and I wrote the book, The High Frontier and Easier Way, and it talks about how building very large space stations to enable permanent settlement in space is actually easier than you might think. And again, later in my conversation, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Got 3 kids. We've got a very saintly wife who traveled with me to Africa and lets me start new companies. And one time I built a really cool treehouse. Here it is in the backyard. Really like the treehouse. It's kind of fun. All right, so that's me. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about my company, the Spaceport Company. We're building distributed launch site infrastructure and a regulatory framework to solve the problem of spaceport congestion and enable point-to-point rocket travel. Basically, we're figuring out how to launch and land rockets on ships and make that a scalable, repeatable system so we can deploy this infrastructure all around the world and solve the problem of spaceport congestion and let there be more launches and create mass transportation to orbit. So the demand for launch pads is growing. This is a number of items launched into space. Like anybody who follows the aerospace industry knows that rocket activity and launch activity, and particularly satellite deployment, is steadily rising. It's dominated by SpaceX, but there are lots of companies nipping at SpaceX's heels. But the supply of launch pads in the United States and around the world is very limited. There are only 4 facilities in the US where you could send a satellite to orbit. Now we have something like 14 FAA licensed spaceports around the country, but you're not able to get to orbit from most of those facilities for a number of reasons, most of which are regulatory. So we don't have enough spaceports, and the spaceports that we have are actually oversubscribed. This slide kind of repeats what was said in the previous 2 slides. I cobbled this slide deck together from a bunch of different slide decks, so there might be some repetition, but suffice to say, demand is up, supply is static, and building new supply has proven to be very, very, very hard. The US has not added a new orbital spaceport in 25 years. There have been numerous attempts to build new orbital spaceports in recent years. There were 2 attempts in Hawaii that were blocked by community opposition. There's a potential spaceport in Michigan that looks like it's about to be blocked by community opposition. There was a project in coastal Georgia, again, blocked by community opposition. So all efforts to add a new orbital spaceport are in regulatory gridlock. Acquiring the amount of land you need to build a new orbital spaceport on the coast is essentially impossible. To acquire the land is really tough, and to get approval to build what is a pretty loud and just disturbing activity. Launching rockets is pretty noxious. It's pretty impossible to acquire land to do that, or at least it has been so far. The last paragraph there is, well, there's a lot of spaceports outside of the US. US companies are attempting to go overseas, but again, there are a lot of regulatory impediments to doing that. Virgin Orbit, which despite being part of the Virgin Group, Richard Branson's kind of conglomerate, is actually a US corporation. They are planning to have their first overseas launch from the UK imminently in the next few weeks. It's taken them 5 years to get export control approval to essentially export that rocket that hangs off the side of the vehicle. It's a horizontally launched vehicle, so it's like a big missile hanging off the wing of a 747. It's taken them 5 years to get approval from the US government to go do that launch in the UK, which is, of course, a strong ally. So my point is, our demand is high, supply is low, it's hard to build new supply, and going overseas is really hard as well. This is a list of some of the regulatory impediments to building new spaceports and operating spaceports. There's FAA rules, range rules, airspace, environmental, so on and so forth. So the solution to building more capacity is to go out to sea. And I'm going to pause here, Eric, and play a little video to show how our system works. And so I hope I don't break this here. I'm going to share my sound. Okay, outstanding. Here we go. Cross your fingers. So just to intro this is a video, a conceptual video of how our system will work, and then I'll play it. It's about 3 minutes long, and then I'll talk a little bit more. I'll continue the presentation. So enjoy this short video. All right, so getting back to the slides here. So what you saw there was is summarized here on this slide, right? The idea is that the vehicle and the payload and the consumables are all loaded on to the vessel at the port. We are obviously, maybe it's not obvious, we are designing our minimum viable product, our initial launch platform, for smaller launch vehicles, the new generation of smaller launch vehicles. So we could launch a vehicle up to 100 feet in height and 110 tons of wet mass. So we're looking at a small to medium-sized launch vehicle, something up to like a Firefly Alpha, or certainly an Electron. We're not talking about something like a Falcon 9 or an Atlas 5, and certainly not a Starship, not yet. So initially we're focused on the smaller vehicles, and eventually we'll work our way up to serving the heavy and the super heavy. So the way it would work at this stage for the smaller vehicles is the vehicle's loaded on at the port with the consumables. What wasn't shown in the video is that we'll have a small payload processing area, kind of a deck house, that will provide clean dried air and climate control for the payload. A key feature of our system is that the vessel remains relatively close. We're not going 1,000 miles out down to the equator. We're staying within 3 to 12 nautical miles of the shore. And that allows us to have strong data and logistical and personnel connections with the shore. We can ferry people out there relatively easy. We could use long-range microwave links or short-range, depending on how you define it, to connect with that, get gigabit connections out to our platform. So we want to stay close. Once it's out there, we use something called a lift boat. These legs extend down to the seabed, and the whole platform is raised up out of the water. So it transitions from a ship that's bouncing around and rocking and pitching and rolling and making a lot of challenges for that vehicle's guidance system. We're turning it into essentially an oil platform that's fixed, raised, stable. So our customers can conduct their operations in a manner identical to how they conduct them on land. We're basically giving them a teeny tiny little island. The operations, the vehicle is fueled remotely. There will be a support ship, or actually our initial idea is to use a land-based mission control site and just delete the second ship entirely. But regardless, the launch platform is uncrewed while the launch is conducted, just like a launch pad on land. You don't have people at the launch site anymore. They're not in a blockhouse. They're 2 miles away. And once the operation is complete and the vehicle is remotely safe, the vessel is remotely safed, then the launch crew returns. The vessel is lowered back down into its transportation mode. The legs are lifted up, goes back to shore, and do it all over again. This has been done before. Boeing did this 36 times with we would call it a heavy-ish size launch vehicle from a very big platform in the early 2000s. The Chinese have been launching rockets from offshore barges since 2019. SpaceX is investigating the idea, and South Korea has started doing offshore launches as well. So this is something that is not unprecedented. However, our system is better than previous concepts. We're making it smaller. We're building it closer. We're not tied to one launch vehicle or one customer. We're approved for use in U.S. territorial waters. We're 100% American owned. Part of the problem that Boeing had with their sea launch system was they had this very convoluted international partnership with Russia and Norway, with a Ukrainian rocket. And that was part of the challenges for running that operation, made it very complicated and expensive. We're avoiding that. And also, we have a scalable, repeatable design. It's very important. We want to be able to give anybody, any rocket company that wants it, their own spaceport. This is something where we can go to a shipyard and I don't want to minimize it, but we could copy and paste it. And that's very important for our business model. We want to be able to prime the pump of more demand by offering more ground side infrastructure. This is just our team. We have a unique skill set, regulations, maritime operations, rocket science, communications. We hired the former designer and mission director for Boeing Sea Launch over there on the right, Steve Thelen. So pretty unique skill set. We're working with Florida, Virginia, Leo Labs, Florida. We have a whole bunch of partners here. We have a lot of letters of intent, actual revenue. This past Friday, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the Virginia spaceport to explore how to incorporate offshore infrastructure into their operations up there, I should say down there in Virginia. Why would a customer want to work with a boat, right? Maritime assets are very challenging to work with. They're very expensive. Well, actually, it's going to save them money. Even though they're paying a premium for that maritime asset, the average rocket company, public rocket company today, you can find this data, burns $500,000 a day in overhead. So every day we can save them from having launch delays. It's $500,000 saved. Typical rocket is delayed for weeks, if not months. Sometimes rocket launches from particular sites are delayed by years. So by reducing launch delays, by opening up that bottleneck and reducing the congestion that commercial rocket companies are experiencing today, we're saving them a lot of money. Also, insurance is a direct savings. By being further out at sea, there's fewer people and property that could be damaged, so your insurance premiums are much reduced. I'm not going to get through all this. We have a lot going on. I'd be happy to go back to this, but we've started in February and we're making pretty good progress. And again, our vision is to have spaceports for every coastal city around the world. We could have spaceports off the coast of New York, San Francisco, Lisbon, Cape Town, Tokyo, Auckland, Sydney. Our system that I showed you could work in all those places, and many, many more. And so wherever it works, we want to have a city, just like they have an airport, we want to be able to offer them a spaceport. Okay, so that's the spaceport company. Now I'm going to transition. I'm probably about halfway through. What's this have to do with space settlement? And wait, what the heck is space settlement to begin with? How do we define space settlement? So space settlement, in my mind, is people moving to space permanently with the intention of raising families there. That last clause is really important, I think, for space settlement. People could move to space right now, right? There are people working in space on the ISS, and they have been for 20 years. It's a huge accomplishment, amazing accomplishment. But they come back, they just do their tour and they come back. They're not going there permanently. And secondly, that idea of going to some place to raise a family, in my mind, indicates a higher level of permanence. You're really putting down roots if you're deciding to, like I said, raise a family there, whatever a family means to you. In the space settlement world, there are sort of two flavors of space settlement. The most common one that most people think of is sort of the Elon Musk, SpaceX idea of building a city on Mars. In other words, settling the surface of a celestial body, be it Mars or the moon or asteroids or some planet somewhere, some moon. And then you contrast that with the idea of orbital settlements, that is building giant space stations from scratch and rotating them to get artificial gravity. And so you can build kind of a biome to your liking, a custom biome. And here we see an image of what one of these concepts might look like. This is by Brian Versteeg His website is listed down here. He's an amazingly talented artist. And this is what an orbital space settlement could look like someday. So the idea of building orbital space settlements is very old. It's I think a Russian author first kind of proposed the idea over 100 years ago. But in the 1970s, there was a physicist from Princeton named Gerard K. O'Neill who did a lot of very rigorous analysis on how to build space settlements. And ultimately it was not economically feasible. He wanted to build very, very, very large structures, and it would require, thousands of space shuttle flights. It required an industrial facility on the moon to create raw materials. It was breathtakingly ambitious. But it was the 1970s, right? We had just done Apollo. Anything seemed possible. Well, the space shuttle did not quite come to fruition like people thought it would. Big technological triumph, but economically was just too expensive to operate. And so O'Neill's vision sort of went by the wayside. Well, recent developments and new research that is summarized in my book that Al Globus did most of the research. So the name of the book is The High Frontier, An Easier Way. It's a shameless plug. Al and several of his colleagues did some research and realized that building orbital settlements is actually a lot easier than what O'Neill originally described, and easier, in fact, than what the average person might think. And the trick is, we discovered or uncovered a place of very low radiation in low Earth orbit. Equatorial low Earth orbit, the amount of radiation shielding for a space station placed in that orbit, all you would need is the hull. You wouldn't need much more than what the hull already provides for somebody who would live there permanently for the rest of their lives. Secondly, the space stations don't need to be as big as O'Neill thought they would be. Part of the reason O'Neill had them so big was he had them rotating, I think, at 1 or 2 RPM. It turns out you can actually rotate them a lot faster, and people would adapt to the faster rotations. So you can reduce that diameter. So you need less mass, you need fewer launches to build these things. So this reduces the size, distance, and mass of a space station to the point where launch vehicles currently under development may be sufficient to provide affordable transportation. Something like perhaps a SpaceX Starship. And then the fourth key is space hotel development can provide an incremental path to settlement construction. We're already starting to see that. Private companies are proposing space stations that could be used as hotels, research parks, manufacturing facilities. So you could change this to say commercial space station development can provide an incremental path to settlement construction with income along the way. But settlement requires mass transportation. You're not going to have cities if you don't have roads. Right? Getting back to my background as a city planner, studying the development of urban areas and the progression and history of urban areas, the most successful urban areas are the ones that have cost-effective and reliable transportation. So if we're going to have millions of people going to hotels in space, living and working in space, as Jeff Bezos says, settling Mars, like Elon Musk says, or settling orbit, as I've described previously in this presentation, we need a system capable of transporting millions of people to and from space. We need mass transportation to space. Well, the good news is at least one company is building such a system to transport millions of people to and from space. right? There's SpaceX Starship. There's also other companies are kind of hinting at it, and I believe are inspired by the same type of vision that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos have said. I think Jeff Bezos would like to see the New Glenn system and perhaps subsequent systems that they're developing and that they've hinted at provide transportation for millions to and from Earth to space. The CEO of Relativity Space, Tim Ellis, has talked about 3D printing rockets on Mars. I believe Rocket Lab, with their neutron system, could scale that up and provide regular flights to orbit. So we know at least one company has specifically announced they're building a system to provide mass transportation to orbit, and there could be others. The bad news is we don't have the ground side facilities to service any of those systems. Starship is an enormous vehicle. SpaceX has been trying to get approval to launch that vehicle to orbit from their Texas site for years now. They will get that approval eventually, but they will not be able to launch regularly from the site they built in Texas because of regulatory impediments, because of environmental impediments, because you have to fly over Florida or Mexico or Cuba to get to various azimuths that you need to get to from that particular facility. So it'll be a great R&D facility. It'll be a great manufacturing facility, but this is the reason SpaceX is developing a new Starship launch site at Cape Canaveral. But Cape Canaveral is already quite congested, and it will require additional infrastructure development to serve both Starship and every other mission that needs to go out of there. Even if Starship is just launching, once a month or once a week, like the Falcon 9 is. Never mind, hourly launches that they're actually designing it for. So we need more spaceports in order to enable mass transportation to orbit, in order to enable commercial space stations, in order to enable space settlement. So more spaceports enable space settlement. But they also do lots of other things too. Even if you're not a fan of space settlement, you think it's crazy, it's not worth the trouble. Spaceports are a deterrent to space war. Having military satellites pre-positioned on rockets floating at sea would allow the Department of Defense to replenish satellites that were destroyed in orbit very quickly. If the Department of Defense is able to replenish satellites quickly, then there's no point for an adversary to knock them out in the first place. So they are a deterrent to space war. Just like the Navy has a nuclear deterrent hidden at sea, the Space Force could have a space war deterrent on floating platforms floating around at sea. So deterrent to space war, that's nice. That's pretty interesting. Having more spaceports, either offshore or land-based or whatever, you get more and better access to orbit. It means more data services from space, more internet bandwidth, more remote sensing, more climate data, all the good stuff that we're currently getting from satellites in space. Well, if we can send more rockets more frequently to space, we can get more satellites up there and get more services back. Having better access to space means you can do space manufacturing. Manufacturing, better fiber optics like Varda is trying to do. There's a bunch of other companies trying to do like 3D printing organs and retinas in zero gravity. Having better launch and landing facilities on land or at sea allow us to get those products that are being quote unquote exported from space back to Earth. More spaceports enable point-to-point transportation. Using rockets to quickly go from one point on Earth to the other. You're not going to have those rockets landing at airports. The aviation industry just is very skeptical about mixing rockets and aircraft. Let's just put it like that. So the Air Force Research Lab is researching how to build a system to take cargo around the world, right? How to take 100 tons on a Starship from Florida to any other point in the world within 60 minutes. Pretty exciting. And then imagine being able, you know, a couple of years later, as that system evolves, being able to use that for passenger service, right? A business person gets on a rocket in New York, they fly to Tokyo, have their business meeting, and they're back home in New York in time for dinner. It'd be amazing if they can make it work. And the key to making that work is better spaceports. You don't have spaceports in Tokyo and New York right now to serve that market. Space solar power is another one. I put a question mark there because space solar power is a very challenging, extremely challenging, probably more challenging than point-to-point rocketry concept. If you don't know what it is, Google it. Space solar power is another old idea, sort of like space settlement. It's been around for 50 years. But the UK, Japan, China are putting a lot of money into it recently. And so it may have new life, and it requires lots and lots of launches to low Earth orbit and actually geosynchronous and medium orbits, just lots of launches. And if you're going to have a lot of launches, you need a lot of spaceports. So I'm gonna close by talking a little bit about my motivations, like why do this? Like, what gets me up in the morning? Why build spaceports? Why be in the aerospace industry at all? Why think about space settlement? And bear with me. I think the best way to do this is to read from my book. I'm not going to do this for very long. I know it's kind of lame to read, but this is kind of fun, and I think the words here say it best. So bear with me. So why care about space settlement? Currently, for the average person, space is a curiosity. It is mildly interesting, but ultimately it seems irrelevant, like a sort of very elaborate sideshow. Most people experience space through brief news reports of the latest rocket launch, or through photos of an amazing astronomical discovery. Some experience it through science fiction, but very few people actually consider the possibility of going to space, because space travel is too expensive and too risky. What if this changed? The cost of space travel is falling and will likely continue to fall, especially if we build more spaceports. What if everyday people could vacation in space? What if they could see the majesty of Earth from orbit, or turn their gaze outwards and look at the universe? What if in a few decades, we, humanity, could leverage the massive resources of space to raise the standard of living for every single person? This is kind of the promise of space solar power. And what if we could do so with fewer impacts on our fragile biosphere? What if we could use space technology to generate vast amounts of energy and simultaneously heal our atmosphere? What if we could use the mind-boggling quantities of raw materials found in asteroids to create wealth beyond all imagination? And what if, far in the future, humanity had done all that and more, and our descendants had sped throughout the stars, exploring new star systems, creating new art, tending to our families, and shepherding our shared terrestrial heritage as we move out gradually and methodically far and wide into the cosmos? And what if it was easier than ever to begin to do all this? Well, it is. A window of opportunity is opening, and there is an easier way to settle space. So that's from the foreword of my book. I want to thank everybody for your time and for humoring me. I'm happy to have some Q&A and some discussion right now. Otherwise, I can ask you guys some questions if you prefer. Hey, Rick.
Hi there. Yeah. So, about the seagoing platform. So, spaceports getting the approval and stuff is obviously really expensive. I'm wondering so one of those platforms, is that something that, do you need to build a new platform for each launch provider? Or can that be shared, or is there a standard modular interface that you swap in and out, or how's that work?
So there is not a standard modular interface yet. There's a company called the Launch Company based in Alaska that's working on something that could work for us, but right now there's not a standard interface. We can share one vessel between launch providers, but that means we have to basically disassemble their ground support equipment and their launch mount and their transporter erector and build a new one up for each launch. So we are incentivizing our customers to basically have one vessel per launch vehicle. That makes the most sense. It's possible to share, but really realistically, it's better to have one vessel per launch vehicle.
Do you know what the cost is like of acquiring a launch pad on ground versus the seagoing vessel? How does that compare?
I know exactly how much it costs. Yes. So my job at Astra was to go find launch pads and spaceports and negotiate for access to them. So I know exactly how much it costs, and our system is competitive. I'll just leave it at that.
Hey, the legs that come down from do those go down to the surface, or they float in the water?
No, so the thing I showed you today, our minimum viable product, the legs go all the way down to the seabed.
So that does limit then where you can put it.
Correct.
It'd be,
yes.
for example, very difficult to go off Monterey Bay, for instance. It's 2 miles deep.
That's
okay.
Right. Yeah. So there's actually a small area right outside of the Golden Gate that would work really well for us. And I say small, I think it's like 100 square miles.
Yeah.
You know, small in the ocean is pretty relative, but we couldn't operate off the coast of Los Angeles, for instance. Water's too deep.
Okay.
Most of Hawaii, water's just too deep. You know, you immediately get out of the harbor and it's 1,000 feet deep.
But could you build? I'm just curious. I mean, you know, they have floating oil platforms and stuff like that. I keep thinking, you know, could this be something that could float? Could you make it stable enough?
That's how the Boeing Sea Launch system worked. It was a floating platform and it could work in infinite depth.
Probably more expensive and more complicated.
Exactly. It's an order of magnitude more capital intensive to purchase and modify. I mean, you can buy a used floating oil rig for a relatively low amount of money, but then modifying it is a major capital expense, and operating it and maintaining it is much more expensive than the system we're operating here. Now, so we're trying to crawl before we walk, before we run. We can only serve small vehicles, but our capital requirements are much less as well.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, while the West Coast, we're limited in where we can operate, we don't really want to operate off the West Coast anyway. Most of our customers want to go to a mid inclination. They don't want to go to polar. So on the East Coast, luckily, it's a much more gradual, depth profile. And so, for instance, off the coast of Port Canaveral, we can operate out to 20 nautical miles. Mm-hmm. We can operate pretty much the entire East Coast except Miami. The Gulf Stream digs.
How far do the legs go down?
150 feet.
Okay, because I've dived off of Palm Springs, and I guess it's about 80 feet there. So you could go, you could sit right there if it wasn't for the Gulf Stream.
Yeah.
Palm Beach, not Palm Springs, Palm Beach.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about, like, we've had customers who have said, can you have a launch site so I could be in my condo on Miami Beach and see a rocket go off? And I'm like, wish we could. I mean, the Bahamas kind of gets in the way too. So, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I was about to observe that on the eastern seaboard, you've got the continental shelf, which is fairly shallow, and that would seem, you said 150 feet you can anchor your platform.
Right.
That sounds like it would give you quite a bit of range along the seaboard there. That would be possible.
That's right. That's exactly right. So we can we could have multiple platforms up and down the East Coast and provide all of our customers with essentially their own launch range. It's
Have you done some study of how strongly your legs seat themselves into this seabed in order to get the stability you need?
Yes, we have. So the vessel that we're talking about is it's called a lift boat, and they are proven commercially available vessels. They were developed in the 1960s to service the oil and gas industry in the Gulf of Mexico. So these things exist. They're designed to operate in up to 100-knot winds. They're big, steel, tough vessels. They do welding on them. They've been blown up in oil platforms. So these are really, really robust vessels. So we're doing the systems engineering right now to understand the main technical risk is integrating a customer launch system onto this existing vessel, like and making sure that all that plumbing works, all the electrical connections works, the comms, that you can basically have a launch pad 5 miles out at sea and make all that work. But the underlying vessel itself, it's for something like an Electron or even a Firefly Alpha, it's perfect, man. It's great. They're just really tough and robust vessels, so it'll be really good. The other big challenge is airspace integration. So we are talking, because if you had a dozen spaceports up and down the East Coast, you'd have to coordinate all these rocket launches, not only with each other and with the existing 2 spaceports on the East Coast, but with all the flights. And so I've been very, very encouraged by the conversations with the FAA air traffic groups about, they're thinking about that already. And they're laying the groundwork for systems inside of the air traffic control, the National Airspace System, to enable that. So I give them a lot of credit for being, forward.
I would imagine it's not too big of a deal because these things only take minutes to go, so they're kind of out of their hair pretty quickly.
Yeah, but they gobble up huge swaths of airspace while you're waiting for them to go.
Yeah, that's
the problem. But the thing that's great about us is if we're 5 to 10 miles offshore, and what we're trying to figure out is could the air routes just kind of go along the beach? Currently, when a rocket is on the pad at, say, Cape Canaveral or Wallops, the keep out zone, for lack of a better phrase, the aircraft hazard area, kind of stretches 5 miles inland, and then it's like 100 miles out at sea. So these airlines have to fly around this big swath that's been blocked out, and it could be blocked for days.
Oh,
they don't really do that much anymore, but even if it's blocked for 8 hours, imagine blocking the New York to Miami air routes for 8 hours. It would drive, it drives the airlines crazy. But if we can push that aircraft hazard area out to sea, and so they don't have to fly as far around those swaths, that's really important. But more importantly is the FAA is starting to figure out how to turn the airspace on and off faster, and reduce the time that the airspace is occupied. So it's pretty cool.
So as you've mentioned multiple times, obviously it's a lot easier to get permission and all to do this out at sea than on land. But what type of stuff do you actually have to get permission for to do this? Yeah,
that's a great question. So I'll step back and say for any spaceport, not just an offshore spaceport, the proponent, right, the spaceport builder has to buy the land, right? You have to control the land, right? You have to be able to say we're going to keep people out. Okay, that's one. You just have to go buy some land. Two, you have to go get a spaceport operator's license from the FAA. It's called Part 420 license, but basically you need, as a spaceport, you need a license. And then 3, the big one is you need to get your environmental approvals, right? You need to get federal and state and probably local approvals for the environmental thing. And that's where the community opposition usually comes into play, because the environmental process is really the public's only way to learn about what's going to happen and provide feedback. And that's typically where you see your spaceport projects stumble a little, is when this public is like, wait, you're going to be launching rockets over my marina, where I fish, where I, swim at the beach, and that's when it usually falls apart. So that's on the spaceport side. Say you do all that, then your launch customers also need to do their FAA license, their environmental, and they have to have customers. They have to have a going concern. So there's the spaceport side and there's the vehicle side. Well, an offshore spaceport doesn't have to do any of the spaceport stuff. We don't need a Part 420 license. We don't need to do our own environmental. We don't need to control the land. All of our approvals will flow through the vehicle. So all of our environmental approvals will flow through the vehicle license. All of our FAA approvals will flow through that. We've confirmed that in writing with the FAA. So that's saved us several years and several $1 million of regulatory effort. The other areas that we have to work with are the Coast Guard, right? We have to make sure our vehicle is certified for use in U.S. territorial waters. We're doing all that now. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the FAA airspace side as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I was also curious, sort of as a companion question, how that would compare to, like, if you went even further out and did it in international water.
Yeah, so a U.S. launch company needs to have a launch license regardless of where they're operating. So even if we were in international waters, if we're flying a SpaceX or a Rocket Lab, they'd still need to go get their FAA license. However, operating in international waters, there's fewer Coast Guard requirements, but they're still pretty. There's still plenty to do. The short answer is there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? There's no way to go to the Wild West somewhere in the South Pacific in the middle of the ocean and kind of just do whatever you want. That's not likely. And even if you could do that, I don't think you'd want to, because you probably couldn't get any insurance. And if you didn't have insurance, you'd probably not get any customers or employees. So I've looked at it. I've spent several years trying to find that magical island somewhere that'll let us do whatever we want, and I don't think it exists. I'd love to be proven wrong.
Let me ask about the number of, if you're talking about, so I was recently, I'm still about 60% of the way through the book. So I saw the number about, this one scared me a bit, 10,000 launches per year. No, yeah. that was per year, right?
Yeah.
Which breaks down, I didn't break down how many that is per day, but
yeah.
What is that? No, I don't want to do the math immediately. But in terms of initially the small launch vehicles, how many are you expecting per day at this point?
So for our business, we're baselining it for each platform. Our business case closes at less than 12 launches a year, right? We don't need more than monthly launches for us to close our business case, right? The book is one thing. The book is very ambitious and speculative and sort of high-minded, and I do believe that in order to get the price for a passenger to go to space comparable to, say, a long distance aviation ticket, you're going to need 10,000 launches a year, if not more. For the spaceport company to be a successful business, we're only looking at 12 to 18 launches per year. If we get more than 12 launches a year, we're really doing very well for our investors.
So you just need one customer that does 12 launches per year and you're good.
Yeah,
pretty much.
We can do even less, but 12 to 18 would be, I tell my investors, if we can do 12 to 18 launches per year, you'll be doing very, very well. Yeah. Some companies have ambitions to go even higher. And SpaceX right now is launching, I want to say once every week or two. In some cases, they're launching like multiple times a week. If a company like Relativity that has the manufacturing capability, has the money, has the workforce, if they could just get the pads, I don't see why they wouldn't also be launching once a week. Rocket Lab is probably nipping at SpaceX's heels. Once they get Virginia stood up, they'll have 3 launch pads. They'll have two in New Zealand and 1 in Virginia. And they're building another one in Virginia for their Neutron vehicle, I think. So, they'll have the capacity to also get up to, maybe weekly or bi-weekly launches. But for us, we're structuring it so we don't need, weekly launches. But getting back to the book, the idea of having millions of people go into space, the price has to be low enough. And in order to get the price low enough, you have to have the cadence up. And so that number in the book, 10,000 launches a year, is sort of I don't want to say a wag, but I think it's a little low. I think if you really dug in and thought about it and did a proper economic and financial analysis and a demand analysis, market analysis, I think you realize, how many long-haul international flights are there in a day or in a year? It's probably a lot more than 10,000 for that price to get lower, to compare it to aviation.
I have a question.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let me see if the screen works. Okay. So you're talking a lot about sending people. Will you, in this sort of space mission, be also considering different energy research projects for your works? For example, we work on water and energy derived from water, and we're thinking about the lunar surface, and just wondering where you guys are in terms of your research openings, and how do we get in contact with you guys in that regard. So that's from one perspective. From the say FAA perspective, reason that I heard about you guys is what kind of pilots are you guys looking for in order to do your vehicle transportation?
Yeah. So happy to email you. My email is, I think it's on one of the slides, but it's just info@thespaceportcompany.com. So I'll put it in the chat. So feel free to send me an email, or anybody on our team. Lindsay does our communications, so she's on Twitter and LinkedIn and everything like that. So feel free to send me an email. So that's the first one. Secondly, we're not a launch provider, right? We only provide the ground side infrastructure. So we build spaceports. So a good analogy is we're not an airline, right? We're the airport. So our customers are the launch customers, and so that they would be sending things into space. Are they going to the moon? Are they going to celestial bodies? Yeah, you bet they are, for sure. Our customers, their customers are the ones with the lunar landers. NASA has the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program. There's a lot of commercial lunar landers that are being funded by NASA that will, go up on commercial launch vehicles. I think most of those will probably launch from, Kennedy or Cape Canaveral, from some existing spaceport. And your question about are the vehicles piloted? I'm not aware of, other than Virgin Galactic, of any piloted space vehicles like an aircraft is. One of our customers is building a the name of the company is New Frontier Aerospace, and they're building a rocket powered aircraft that's vertical takeoff and landing. They have DoD funding. They've tested an engine and a pre-burner. Their CEO is a former NASA assistant administrator. Their CTO is Jess Sponable, who worked on DCX. So this is like a super competent and accomplished team. They have money, and they are building a point-to-point transportation system. I don't believe it's piloted, but it's a very, very exciting system because it's VTOL, so it has a very low footprint, and it could get anywhere in the world in 90 minutes.
So wait, so you're going to be sending people on unpiloted rockets?
I'm not sending people on anything, but our customers might be sending people on unpiloted rockets, yes.
As a pilot, I would be scared.
I'm sometimes more scared of the piloted things than the unpiloted things, but I understand your concern. Yeah.
I'd rather be in control than having the machine be in control.
Yeah.
Of my landing in particular. Okay, so in essence, they're going to be not piloted for maybe some minor combination of sorts.
Yeah, most launch vehicles are not piloted.
Okay. And in terms of the research that you might do, you're suggesting for me to contact this info email.
Yeah. Feel free to send me an email, send me your questions. That's the best way to reach me. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
So, what are you looking at in terms of time frame for, like actually being able to get stuff up there?
Yeah. So we are expecting our operational system, so a system able of conducting orbital launches for small vehicles. Basically, the thing that I showed you in the video today, we're targeting that to be up and running in 2025. We're trying to go faster than that, but I'm trying to under-promise and over-deliver here. So 2025 is when we'll have our first orbit-capable system. We are also planning demos. So next spring, we'll do our first demonstration with a leased vessel, and it'll allow us to test our operational and logistical and regulatory procedures, airspace integration, talking about working with the FAA to turn airspace on and off. So we'll do our first demo then, and we have a second demo that may be happening. We have a customer who's interested, so we're looking to do that maybe in 2024. So it looks like Adrian says CubeCab is developing a launch vehicle where the first stage is piloted, but only the first stage. Adrian, is the first stage an aircraft like Virgin Orbit?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to bounce this by you. I was just answering the previous commenter's question, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. The FAA and others consider Virgin Galactic, launch vehicles that use a carrier aircraft to get up to altitude. and those aircraft are piloted, those are considered the first stage of the launch vehicle. So the launch begins when the wheels are rolling for takeoff. Actually, even before that, when the launch vehicle that goes up into space is fueled, the launch ends when the aircraft lands and the wheels stop. So, it's kind of semantics. It's an aircraft that's piloted, and that is the first stage of a launch vehicle. Okay.
Well, since I'm off mute and I'm asking anyway, out of curiosity, how feasible would it be for you to have a seaborne airstrip for an air launch vehicle to take off from, rather than the vertical launch as you did, as in your video? Just spitballing.
Yeah. It would. We've looked at that. It's more challenging. We've had discussions with a number of short takeoff. They're not VTOL. Short takeoff drone companies. They're like Uber air taxis, and they're having trouble finding ground infrastructure as well. And they only need like 300 feet of runway. And I'm like, anyway, bottom line is that it's just not cost effective, really, for us to do that, for what they're willing to pay. And so to build a proper runway that's maybe a mile long, it would be fantastically expensive. I just don't see it happening. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah. There was a concept called mobile offshore base that the DoD looked at in the 90s, where it was building an airfield that would float around in the ocean. And I don't know what the cost estimates were for there. I've never found any cost estimates that were credible. But you might want to look into that mobile offshore base. It was like I think a Navy concept, like Marine Corps Navy concept.
I have to ask the silly question. So we were talking about the San Francisco Bay Area and the fact that there's a lot of area that you could build. Any chance that we may see such a thing in our vicinity, San Francisco Bay?
In the Bay? No, I don't think so.
Oh, not in the Bay. I'm sorry. I mean, outside on the Pacific. Offshore.
Never say never. Never say never. Working the California Coastal Commission, it has very high standards, correctly so. It's a sensitive marine environment, but the water is shallow enough, and you can get to a lot of azimuths, and we can get out of the way of the marine traffic, and there's not a lot of air traffic, so it kind of ticks all my boxes. We would just need a customer, and we would need, we could get outside of state waters, I believe. So theoretically, we wouldn't have to ask permission from the California Coastal Commission. But God, I really wouldn't want to piss those guys off. So I think we'd want to make sure that we're, had their blessing, and that might take some time. So I wouldn't say never say never, but yeah. I will say though, I have previously assessed the risk to launches from inside the bay, from locations, inside the bay, and
yeah, that's scarier.
Yeah,
what did you find?
Pretty wild. It's pretty wild. Not a good idea. Not likely to happen anytime soon. Yeah. A lot of air traffic.
I think
sea traffic, and just a lot of people. So it's just not going to happen.
Right. Just the amount of air traffic that runs on one side of the bay or the other. It's sort of mind-boggling.
That's right. But operating out of the West Coast, particularly like in the area right outside of the Golden Gate and that sort of area, you're going retrograde. You don't want to go. You get a major payload penalty to launch to orbit to a mid inclination from that site. So it's not really a great spot to go to mid inclination. I haven't checked if you could get polar. I think to get to a polar, straight 90-degree polar inclination, I think you're flying over the coastline from if you're right outside the Golden Gate. I'd have to double check.
I don't think so.
Okay, well then it
I'd be
becomes
curious.
more
Yeah,
yeah.
Because I think when
Vandenberg, that's a
Go
little
ahead.
Southern California, does polar orbits a lot, so you can probably get them from San Francisco area too.
I'll look at the map right now. Let's see.
Yeah, I was thinking about Vandenberg as well. Yeah, they are sort of slightly retrograde, but I don't think there's anything protruding on the coast up here that would cause a problem.
Interesting. Well,
a little bit easier than Alaska, maybe.
It's a lot. Yes, it's a lot closer. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah,
plus the key customer, right?
East Coast is a lot easier at this point.
Yeah, you could get that company, which is based in Alameda, California, to ferry their rocket out to outside the bay, and that make their travel shorter.
Yeah, I know those guys pretty well.
Yeah.
So back on space settlements, have you done any study as to the types of people who might prefer to live on an orbital habitat, such as elderly for retirement communities, or the, shall we say, medically sensitive, people who would benefit from the extremely controlled environment, literally better than anything you get on Earth, that you could provide in an orbital habitat?
Yeah, Al Globus and I wrote a paper. The short answer is sort of. Al Globus and I'm trying to get the link for it, did a small paper in 2017 where we did an unscientific poll. I think we got like 1,000 respondents. Here's the link. And the question is not quite what you were asking, but the question was, how small of a space station would you be happy living in? And it was like, something the size of the ISS, something the size of a cruise ship, something the size of a city, and something the size of, New York City, a mega city, something like that. It was sort of qualitative. And this was in 2017. I found the link. I put it there. I don't remember what the conclusions were. And it was sort of, again, it wasn't a great survey, I'll be honest, because it was unscientific. We didn't correct for different gender or age or economic situation or whatever. But I do recall being pleasantly surprised at how many people were willing to live in a pretty tight quarters. More people were willing to live in something the size of a cruise ship for the rest of their lives than I otherwise thought would be the case. So the link is there. You can check it out. To answer your question, I don't know how many. I'm not aware of any data or market surveys of, say, asking people, when you're retired, would you be willing to live in a retirement home in space? Don't know. Good question. That'd be a good, like, some MBA doing, or some graduate student trying to do their marketing PhD. Can you get a PhD in marketing? I don't know, but somebody doing some research project, that would be cool and very useful, I think, for these space station companies. Sorry,
there is a friend of mine. Yeah, there's a friend of mine in Southern California who is pushing. He's pushing the idea of people who have basically retirement age, who want to go and live on the Earth. That's sort of been his thing. So this is Doug Plata, if anyone's ever heard of him. So he's been pushing hard on that angle, but I haven't heard him push the angle of what about doing this in a free space settlement. That one I haven't heard from him.
Yeah, he's Doug's great. I know Doug. I support him. I think his efforts are good. He is not convinced yet about the benefits of free space. He's laser focused on the moon, and it's funny in the kind of space settlement community, people have their own little. Some people are just really into Mars, and some people are really into the moon, and I think our book makes the argument that going to orbit is easier. We already have space stations. The moon is a pretty challenging environment for a lot of reasons, more challenging than just being in low Earth orbit, especially now that it appears that there's a low radiation harbor in equatorial low Earth orbit. And we might have soon a system that's able to get, thousands of tons of mass into orbit on a regular basis in the form of Starship. The moon is still pretty far, and Mars is super far. And they're both really, really challenging environments. Really cool though. If I had a choice between nothing and going and living on the moon, yeah, sure, I would go live in Doug Plata's Moon City.
By the way, he may be changing his position. I probably should not speak up for him, but I remember having a discussion where he was thinking of another. It wasn't okay. Yeah, so he was thinking about Mars, as well. He was some of the trade-offs that he was looking at recently. But I'll let him make that announcement. I'm not convinced that he's completely changed his mind yet. But it was an interesting conversation to have with him. Has there been, to your knowledge, has there been any kind of satellite system in ELEO, sort of as an operational thing or a demonstration that shows that this is a really low radiation environment? You can really operate something.
I'm not aware of that, and I don't think that exists, because ELEO for like remote sensing or comms, it's not really a useful orbit for typical satellite applications. So that was a project that actually Al and I mentioned it to Al, and we kind of tossed it around a little bit. Said, man, how much would it cost to just stick a CubeSat up there and characterize the environment? But
radiation
the real answer is it's you really don't need to. The data are really good because ISS has passed through ELEO multiple times, and so it's my understanding there is a body of data where, not consistently, but sort of periodically, they've been able to test the radiation environment, as it sort of passes through on a different inclination, as it passes through, over the equator. And I'm not sure it's really needed. I think the data are pretty straightforward. That if you're not going through the South Atlantic anomaly, your radiation exposure is going to be much, much less. In other words, the reverse is most of an astronaut's radiation exposure on the ISS is due to passing through the South Atlantic anomaly. And if you change the inclination and make it equatorial at 0 degrees, you're not getting most of the radiation exposure that you otherwise would.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, because I think a lot of space systems need to also be designed for, some interesting inclination of orbit. And I'm thinking that even if you were to design, I can't think of a good application. That is a problem. But if you were to design a system that did not need that level of protection and stuff like that, and show that it was able to operate for years at a time, that might change some people's thinking. But I just can't think of what the application is.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I'll that kind of jogs my memory. And something that's pretty interesting, combining spaceports with equatorial low Earth orbit. If we had space stations in equatorial low Earth orbit, and we had a spaceport on the equator somewhere, either on land or in the ocean, you wouldn't need to change planes from your spaceport to your space station. So theoretically, you could have every 90 minutes a launch. It's almost like this conveyor belt going back and forth. And so I envision this sort of transfer hub in equatorial low Earth orbit, where you have your surface vessels going up and down, like I said, every 90 minutes, and then it's like a bus station, and then you're taking your transfer out to where you want to go from that transfer node. Pretty exciting idea, because that transfer node would then become a city, right? There, eventually you would just say, if all I need to do for my, for example, space manufacturing business is be in microgravity, I'll just do it here. And that's how cities have grown. One of the ways cities have grown historically, at a crossroads, that's where you get your people crossing through and transferring modes and changing directions. Well, that's where towns grow, and towns, eventually grow where rivers come together. That's where cities grow, because that's where there's cross shipment. So that could be a way to have more people living in space, and countries that are on the equator, Brazil, Kenya, or not Brazil, but Kenya, Ecuador. Brazil's kind of close, I think. They're well placed to encourage that sort of development, because they would really be the gateway to what would eventually be a city in orbit. So this is all, again, pretty speculative and pretty high-minded, but that ability to not do a plane change has a lot of very positive, virtuous knock-on effects. It takes a long time to get to the ISS from Florida and from Baikonur, right? Yeah, hours at the very least. I think the fastest the Russians have done it is maybe 3 hours.
I think that one is 55 degrees or something like that, the inclination.
Yeah. And
so it's really hard.
I think from Florida, they're typically in that capsule for, I want to say, for at least a day. Like, that stinks. You want to get up there quick and get to work. So
yeah. Actually, there is, so I guess space manufacturing, if you could do that in helium, you didn't need that level of protection. I mean, Absolutely. You may be able to use just straight commercial electronics without all the extra protection that goes with it.
That would be
the
really
other thing
exciting.
that just occurred to me is we could use another space telescope, optical level or something like that. It would be nice to have it at that inclination, and then maybe build a station nearby.
There's a lot of in fact, every space manufacturing application I've heard of either needs microgravity or high rad, or that's it. So, like, they don't need to be in a particular inclination. It's not like a remote sensing satellite that has to be in a particular place to look at a particular place on the Earth. Manufacturing, they just want the microgravity and the high rad, the high radiation. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, definitely that's true for condensed matter when we're interested in specific heat and calculating specific heat and microgravity levels. But I did have a question on the idea of satellite construction. There's a section that we are looking into, very kind of an innovative foundational physics idea on satellites that would be, if you want, naturally constructed in the sort of lower ionosphere, where there's a higher density of neutrals, with supersonic speed excitation, sort of the way that our Arecibo used to be able to excite those areas. And we're looking into the possibility of encapsulating sound signals, acoustic signals, that maybe later could be coupled to bits of information. So is there somebody that would be interested on those ideas? We're really sort of at the foundational physics beginning. We're working through the equations. We're working through what it would take to create the supersonic events. And we believe that we could also have some resonance structures associated to them. And it would be sort of a natural way of sort of like storing information utilizing acoustic data.
I don't know. That's not what we're doing.
Probably need a payload.
Sounds like a really interesting idea. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that would be a great, AFWorks is doing a SBIR phase 1 open topic starting in January. I would throw together a SBIR and send it over and see if anybody's interested.
Who's doing that?
So the Air Force, DoD has open phase 1 SBIR topics twice a year.
Could you send me that information? I'm actually about to have a meeting with the Navy in a few days.
Yeah, I think I have it right here.
Thank you.
Here it is.
Oh, you got it posted already?
Do you have?
I was
it
going
in
to say
the chat?
AFWorks is just. Yeah, they're spelled AFWERX. Adrian has got it there. You just look them up and you'll find out how to
Great.
submit SBIRs and things.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
By the way, I'm just going to do a time check here and say that it is just after 8 o'clock, which means it's after 11 p.m. Tom's time. So
You still awake?
Yeah.
So maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm done.
Well, I'll ask something. I haven't yet read your and Al's book, but I would presume that for construction of equatorial low Earth orbit settlement, you'd be pretty much dependent on Earth launches. Space resources don't really play a role in that, as they would in the classic O'Neill sort of settlements.
Correct. Yeah. So right. So we are in the book, we envision and we kind of do all of the high level conceptual calculations. For example, there's a lot of discussion in the book about the first space settlement would require 150 Falcon Heavy launches, or 75 Starship launches.
Right.
So yeah, the idea is it would all be kind of like how the ISS was built on the ground, and then everything would be lifted up. Why? I love the idea of mass drivers on the moon and hollowing out asteroids. I mean, I'm all about that. I think it's fantastic. And the book does talk extensively about asteroid mining and utilizing raw materials, near Earth objects. There's a big discussion about the prevalence and the wealth in near Earth objects. Never mind the asteroid belt. Within the orbit of the moon. Anyway, so but the idea is to build these first settlements. It would all be launched up from Earth using something like Starship.
Well, I've looked at this some, and I know it's difficult to get space resources into low Earth orbit. Even with aero braking, it poses challenges.
But if we have, even just a couple of thousand people permanently living in low Earth orbit, it makes it that much easier to have people, commuting, up to higher orbits, maybe working on intermittently crewed stations that are processing raw materials that are brought in by robots even further out, right? And then they're dropping it down in the gravity well to serve these communities in low Earth orbit. Just having people 300 miles up makes everything a lot easier. It creates a market, it creates a workforce, and it creates a city, which creates ideas and innovation and investment. And so just getting that much further out of the gravity well, even just into low Earth orbit, is a major benefit for getting our civilization all the way out there.
I forget who said this, Heinlein or somebody, but once you get into low Earth orbit, you're halfway to anywhere in the solar system.
Right. That's the that's right. That's right. Yeah. It's true. I think it's true. I think I'm happy to answer any other questions. Feel free to send me an email, but Eric and Rick, if it's all right with you, I think I'm going to sign off here.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was a lot of fun though, and happy to come back in a couple months or a year and do it again if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's all in fact thank Tom Marotta for taking the time to be with us.
Yay.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you guys for having me. It's my pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
And thank you to everyone else for joining us this evening. And hope to see you again soon. Like I said earlier, we do have a happy hour next Tuesday at 6 o'clock in Sunnyvale, which there'll be an email with further information. Actually, I believe our e-update that went out yesterday did contain some information, but we'll send out another reminder again as we get closer. And beyond that,
so that's if you're an AIAA member, you'll get that.
Yeah. And beyond that, we are planning other events for after the new year, so we'll be in touch about those. And you can keep up with us on if you're on our mailing list, you'll get our updates. Otherwise, we also do announcements through Facebook and LinkedIn, and sometimes on Engage as well. So with that, I think that that will conclude our meeting for tonight. Thank you all again, and have a good one.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye all.